Right now, all across the country and the world, we're seeing wave of union activism, wave upon wave, really, of union activism as brave workers organize themselves. This is, of course, happening at a time when wealth and income gaps are at Gilded Age levels, though you really wouldn't get any sense of that if all you watched was terrestrial or even cable television news. In contrast, our guest today puts worker stories front and center. Monica Cruz, a labor reporter with Breakthrough News and host of On the Picket Line. Welcome to the Deconstructing Consent podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. Are workers' voices, stories, perspectives, like actual working class stories, voices, and perspectives, missing in most of what we see in the corporate produced news world right now?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I know growing up, someone being really interested in politics and watching cable news, and what you described as the news that most Americans have access to and knowledge of, right? In the mainstream press, you don't really hear too much about worker struggles at all. I think in this day and age, social media has given an extra platform to folks in all kinds of struggles for justice. To voice their concerns, to uplift their stories. But I think overall, you see the fact that labor reporting is not considered like hot or interesting. And I think it's funny how you see this in a country where the labor press was like the foundation of a lot of newspapers and generally journalism. We see this during the muckraking, whatever journalism you call, like throwback to history class in high school, learning about the ways that labor reporting was always something that was really radical, really out there in the streets, really something that, folks getting caught up in the middle of brawls, type thing. And it has just gone to this very, very, very tiny sector of journalists who are doing this work. And then even within that, you just get people who are, just basically reporting from press releases that they get from unions, not really being there on the ground. You get a lot of folks who, in my opinion, take a kind of ultra left and like anti-union stance on things and are constantly, taking shots at these big unions where, of course, there are so many contradictions and criticisms that we can have of these organizations. At the end of the day, unions are really the last buffer between the capitalist exploiting class and the working class of this country, especially in a time, as you described so well, of what I would call late stage capitalism, where we're really seeing the contradictions of our society reach a stirring point, and the pandemic bringing out so many of the naked inequalities about this entire system. This whole thing of the essential worker now becoming this trend, and it's like working class people have been known that the work that they do is essential to society, and that we should have nothing but respect and admiration for the people working in our hospitals, working in food service, taking care of our kids, teaching our kids, right? So transporting us, so many things. So it's just kind of like now we're getting to a point where this system has dug itself a grave so deep where it's like you can't put the cap on this anymore. People are very interested in what workers are doing in terms of organizing in their workplaces. And I think the struggle at Amazon right now, at the Amazon warehouse in Bessemer, Alabama, where largely a Black women-led workforce is pushing forward a union campaign at the site of the most anti-union, one of the largest, arguably the largest, most richest and powerful corporation in the world that is literally out here hiring Pinkerton spies to union bust at warehouses all over the country. It's just very clear that workers have had enough. And no matter where you are, if you're working in a place where you're doing union organizing, where you're in a union or you're fighting for one, or you're going on strike, wherever it may be, it's just like I can just say, in my personal experience, two of my closest friends, both other Black and brown women of color, are are waging union struggles at their own jobs. They both work in social work, nonprofit, legal aid type fields, and they're pushing forward. It's just like you look at every single sector of society, there is class struggle. So the way in which the mainstream has just kind of tucked this under the rug and made labor news something that largely just doesn't exist, is also a testament to the power of workers and the power of labor reporting, because they understand that when our voices are not heard, as I say, in my show, when worker stories are not front and center, that creates the perfect environment for people to feel so isolated and feel like the struggles that they're experiencing in their workplaces are just, one-off instances, and they're not seeing and getting that inspiration and learning from workers in other industries whose lives may look differently from theirs, but who are struggling for the very same basic things in their jobs, right? So that's one thing that can unite us all. We are all workers, and that's something that the capitalist class needs to do as much to defy and mystify as well.
It's so interesting because you're right. People, like not reporting on labor activity and corporate media. So that is media outlets who, in and of themselves, might, in isolated cases, do really fine and important work, but who are ultimately owned by these conglomerates, which which workers are railing against and trying to, and oftentimes organize unions and fight for better pay, treatment, and things of that nature. There's a vested interest from the top down in this ever increasingly conglomerated media sphere that are owned by these corporations. There's just a vested, simple to understand material interest into not covering that activity. And I think you're right. One of the main reasons they do it is because then people feel isolated, and they might feel. I think there's a lot of discussion about how people feel alienated from a lot of things, from one another, but let's say in this instance, from their work. So they know things aren't right. They know they're not fulfilled. They know they're not really being treated fairly, or have safe conditions even, or get enough pay to survive or support themselves or their family. And they know that. They know it's not right. They know it's like the people on top are pushing them down, but they're really not connected, it would seem, or we're told they're really not connected to the causes of it. So they just feel this angst, this alienation. But until we see others and hear from others and connect with others who have that same position and those same feelings and the same alienation, there's not much actionable stuff that we can do. And at a time where everything is really atomized from like what we consume in the media sphere, because it's tailored to us through algorithms, or we're told to stay in now because, understandably, because of a fucking pandemic, right? But like we're really isolated, and so the decreasing like open spaces. I forget what the common spaces are increasingly like already have been like eaten up, and now we can't really occupy them safely because of the pandemic. It's really understandable that these corporate outlets would ignore that. So like you said, it's also impressive. So how is this happening from what you're seeing, and we'll get to talk more about your role as an organizer, because you're also an organizer in addition to a reporter. But from that perspective and that experience, and also just you as a reporter and analyst now, why are workers still being successful? How are they doing this despite being shut out by media, which basically is a way to shut off people from one another? How are they still being successful in your view?
I always think of this really, just famous, revolutionary slogan that you hear in a lot of progressive and leftist spaces. When we fight, we win. And that does not mean that every single time we fight, we're going to win, right? But it means that protracted struggle is a thing, right? And that when we do organize and when we do show our force and our might as workers united against, as the Occupy Wall Street movement, I think, did a very great job of putting into words the 1%, right, of simplifying. We see that workers' power is inevitable. First off, like I'm just a Marxist, like the Marxist. The fall of the system is inevitable. As I said, this really great quote that I love from Marx. Talking about how the capitalist class digs its own grave. Right, this system digs its own grave. It creates its own contradictions. It creates its own downfall. Period. And I really argue, like I said, that I feel like we really are living in late stage capitalism, in that final stage of capitalism that Marx described, that inevitably leads to a total reordering of society, and that leads to socialism because it's a necessity. And I think just in terms of, again, just we're talking about sheer numbers here, okay? Why does the capitalist class feel the need to hide itself behind billions of dollars spent on the military industrial complex, behind billions of dollars spent on police, and the CIA and the NSA, and the just myriad of forces of surveillance, of violence, of repression that our communities are under? Like, it's because they're scared. Like, it's because they're scared. Like, I think there was like some BS news like last year about like Trump like visiting like a bunker or some shit in Florida. I'm definitely like misquoting like the state or whatever it was, and I'm not even sure if it was like 1,000%, but people were talking about it was like trending on Twitter, which was like Trump in the bunker. And I'm like, and why y'all think that these capitalists are so excited to go and fucking colonize Mars, y'all? Like, why do you think people like Elon Musk are just like jizzing over the thought of fucking like space travel? It's just like because they know that this system is destroying our planet, that workers are going to rise up, that the guillotine is coming, miss. And it's just like, they know that the system is not sustainable, and that literally this system is killing the physical planet that we occupy. It's just like they would literally rather go to fucking Mars and build a fucking billionaire colony there than have to deal with the ramifications of what the system does, and again, it's inevitable collapse, right? So it's just like, to me, all of the ways too, like just the union busting that is just so inherent in our on the legal code of this country, the way that, regardless of, the fact that we have the NLRB, and, workers do technically have the right to organize, like we see the ways in which every single step of that process is stifled. And even after workers vote to organize a union, the way that it's like I think it's half of newly formed unions take at least 2 years to actually come to their first fair contract agreement. Like and the capitalist class relies on the fact that we are workers literally working to survive. So it's just like our time just flies by so quickly. Like, this is not something that's inherent. I mean, I guess it's inherently part of the human condition, but it's like, you think about the time that like people commit to just working and to just making rent, making their bills, putting food on the table, reaching, I don't know, doing basic human things like pursuing creative things and traveling and stuff. It's like we're just so programmed to just be like, okay, just point A to point B. That's all I got to do. Point A to point B. Just make it this week. Just make it this month. Whatever it may be. The capitalist class relies on that. They know that we're working our asses off, and it's really damn hard to organize against the boot that is stepping on your neck every single day. So I think, the fact that workers are successful is the fact that, the capitalist class in its ways, always has to give these concessions, and always has to get to a point where it's like, listen, like, we need to do something to address all of the crises facing this country. And I think, and we see over history, a comparison to this is the way that progressive legislation is passed in, the upper echelons of this system's legislative system. The way that you look at history, the only way that some of the most progressive policies that have been enacted on a federal level have actually gotten through is through struggle in the streets, through militant struggle. It's not like LBJ one day woke up and was like, I'm just going to sign the Civil Rights Act into law. Like, nah, it was because people were fighting and resisting nonstop in the streets to demand that these progressive laws are put into place, right? So again, that it reminds me of this like very very famous, symbol or political cartoon out of the labor movement where it's like a bunch of little fish making up like a bigger fish than the one big fish, right? Like that is one thing that we have on the capitalist class that keeps them up at night. I can promise you every single day is the fact that they know that we are the millions. We do have the power. But I think that's why in my reporting and in my organizing, we're generally solidarity is number one, because that is our biggest weapon. And I think that is how workers have been able to be successful, is really just by finding what unites them instead of focusing on what divides us, because it's a lot of shit that's going to divide us even after the fall of capitalism inevitably happens and we are building a new system, which I hope to God every single day I will see that day. It's just like, bro, like it's not over. As the Cuban revolutionaries say, it's a revolution within a revolution, to get to the highest stage of human history, right? And again, all that shit is inevitable. So these Elon Musk and whatever the hell, they're shaking in their boots every damn day, and they up the violence because they're scared, period.
So much good stuff you said there. You mentioned earlier, you went back to it now, Elon Musk and like ideas of colonizing Mars, as as if as if white proto and capitalists have not done enough colonizing. Now the talk is to colonize literally other planets. And the question there, it almost becomes like comic book level pathos when you have the world's richest people who are well aware of not just their precarious situation, but the very planets, and they are completely able to stop and then reverse course. Like they're not they're not cynics, or they're not disbelievers of like climate crisis or anything like that. They understand this, and they understand their contribution to it, their outsized contribution to it. Yet they don't. Great journalist, another great journalist, Chris Hedges, he talks about how the super rich, they're pathological, right? Like it's pathological, and they'll just make decisions at this level, at a policy level, that are just suicidal. I don't say that glibly. I mean that. Like I'm not talking about suicide lightly. And I think, to me, in my mind, that connects again to a system. This capitalist system is, I would argue, and many better thinkers have argued in other words, that it is suicidal. That is, it cannibalizes itself. It ultimately digs its own grave, which, as you were talking about, it necessarily does that. So once you buy into the logic of capitalism, you then seem to fall into this. One seems to fall into this pathos of just, even while you're seeing it happen in front of you, and you're seeing you move the levers of the mechanism towards your and the entire globe's death, you just can't see your way out of it. So that really struck me, what you're saying, and I think that is a true thing. And like you say, they're getting more violent. The response now is a more reactionary response. Do you feel in decades past, in America at least, and other countries too, that the things I know a lot less about, when labor movements and groups have successfully organized and pressured for different things, they were able to kind of give option A or option B. Option A is revolution. Option B is give us these like very reasonable improvements, and we won't come for you in your house and rip you out and with the pitchforks, right? There was this kind of negotiation by force and mobilization on the strength of mobilization. Do you think that those opportunities are going to be less because the ruling establishment is becoming more reactionary, or do you feel we just have to kind of go through that cycle where we're going to get our asses beat and murdered a lot again, but if we keep going, we can reach the point maybe like in the 30s where you're able to go to the president of the United States and still demand some changes?
Wow, yeah, that's a lot to think about and a really interesting question. Um, Shit. I mean, I don't know. I think, yeah, I think it's kind of hard for me to compare this moment to moments of the past, because I just think about the surveillance state, how massive it is, how like social media apps can literally like predict our moods, like how it's just like everybody every day, like I was thinking of this and then an ad pops up on I'm like, have we already been microchipped? I'm like, have we, like, did that happen before the vaccines, or was that already like, it's just like, what, so I think it really depends. I think, I've been really fucking stunned by just like the uh how do you what's the better word for it? But we already know, like, the US capitalism in itself, the ruling class inherently, just a chauvinism, right? There's a figures my comrade who I've been trying to get in contact with, who's in Birmingham. He works for the RWDSU, is calling me shit. That's too bad. He knows I have meetings at this time already.
You can pick it up.
Shit. No, it's okay. Because it would probably be long. Oh my god, it's like, of course I'm waiting for his call. Like, of course now. Anyway, just go that part. But yeah, I would say just like the callousness of the capitalist class is always something that really like stuns me. I think nowadays, we just see the way that the unbridled brutality in which the ruling class comes down on really any movement. I remember just in my years, really paying a lot more attention to politics and being involved in the movement myself. Like, Obama being hailed as this, like, liberal hero, whatever. And it's like, he was literally like sending tanks to like shoot at like old like grandmas on the res, like fighting a dapple. You know what I mean? Like, that's incredible struggle in South Dakota waged by our brothers and sisters in the indigenous community out there. And it's just like, we look at the brutality that folks in the anti-racist movement experienced last summer, and just the crazy charges being put against people. I have some comrades in Denver right now. It's a huge victory. A ton of charges were dropped against them, but they're leaders in the movement, demanding justice for Elijah McClain, and they got kidnapping charges put on them for simply holding a protest outside of a police station. Like, it's just such utter BS. But it's like, we already know the lessons of CONTELPRO and how hard the ruling class will go to break up and divide any movement that has the possibility of really successfully bringing out a massive, in my opinion, socialist movement in this country. Is the biggest fear of the bourgeoisie. And I think, yeah, I think it's just like the fact. I think of like the Irish revolutionary Bobby Sands, in that he says, like, our victory. He says to me, so like, so our victory will be, or our revenge will be, the laughter of our children. And it's like, I think about, like, they literally see us like some ants, because they know it's like, you can kill like one generation of leaders, but the repercussions of that violence in itself, and then the violence that you continue to inflict onto people from day one of their lives on this planet, is like, that you're creating the conditions for resistance. Like, when there is repression, there is resistance. Like, it is two sides of the same coin, right? So it's just like, or I shouldn't say two sides of the same coin, but it's like yin and yang, whatever. Like, it's inevitable that it's going to breed that, right? So the capitalist class knows that, and it's like, but they also know, and particularly the American empire knows, that it just can't go down and like mow down like any like black or brown neighborhood, in some death squad like fashion, like the US has done, across the world. They can't really get away with that here in the empire, right? Everything needs to be polished and look good. And, there needs to be this facade of democracy put up, right? But I think the capitalist class is definitely growing more like belligerent, you know what I mean? And that it was really stunning to me when we saw the insurrection at the Capitol at the beginning of this year. Like, what a bang to start off 2021. And it's just like, the way that the ruling class was so paralyzed, because they're clearly also very split. Like, there were undoubtedly elements of the ruling class that were colluding and, were sponsoring this attack. And on the other hand, then everyone had to, all of the Republicans who had the Twitter fingers the day before, talking about an illegitimate election, were then immediately falling in line. Like, no, like, this was an assault on our democracy, da da da. Like, know how messy and embarrassing that made the US ruling class look in that moment? It was just like a mockery for the world to see, for this country who goes around telling other nations what democracy is, sending their troops and their bombs to bomb democracy into the Middle East or what have you. And it's like, yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I'm definitely not directly answering it. But I think really just shit is inevitable, and I think it's inevitable, and I think right now I can only just imagine the draconian like 1984 type shit that the ruling class is thinking up in their closed door meetings about how the hell they're going to continue to stifle us and control us, using all of this technology also, that I think is what makes this historical moment so unique. So I think it's the ability for them to repress and control us that is something that just makes this time so hard to compare to other times. And also just the level of inequality and the level, I thought you spoke so well to the alienation that Marx wrote about, and that people are experiencing in a way I don't even think Marx could have ever imagined. Like, I'm just like, if my man came back like from the dead and saw what was going on, he would be like, what the hell? Like, I did not expect it to go this far. Like, I can promise you. But yeah, I think but there's so much to learn from those struggles of the past, right? The struggle in Bessemer, Alabama, has encouraged me to finally get on my game and read Hammer and Hoe, a really incredible history of Alabama communists organized during the Great Depression. And I mean, just the stories of just the first couple of chapters that I've gotten through of the incredible repression, because this is obviously combined with like the context of the Jim Crow South. The violence was astounding, and people didn't stop. And people nowadays, we're talking about the great grandkids or great great grandkids who are in Alabama right now still fighting back while police are swarming and surveilling that warehouse in Bessemer, right? So you know, same system, I guess, looks a little different, definitely a lot more intense, but I think people will keep fighting back. So maybe yes, I come to an answer to that question. I do agree that, you know, it's kind of like we already know. Like, I don't know, I'm a member of a socialist party. Like, I know the history of that stuff, and I just have to be sitting there having conversations at the dinner table with my family. Like, y'all know the implications of that. We don't care. That's because the system is killing us every day. That is the conditions, again, that the system creates. Like, people put their lives on the line every single day, do incredible acts of courage and bravery, because we understand that this system sucks every last drop of humanity out of us, and it's live free or die trying. Like, really. And I think workers around the world every single day are living that out. And we're seeing that history being made, and that repression being overcome every single day.
No, that's great. And yeah, I mean, obviously, no one can have like some perfect prognostication, but I think, you know, you saying among other things that we at least have lessons that we could have learned from, you know, COINTELPRO to deal with the modern versions of it, to deal with the scaled up weapons surveillance, most notably that the capitalist class has over us, to these new laws which are really intensifying to make, like you mentioned, these kidnapping charges just for organizing. I mean, there's just so many examples. I'm writing a story. It'll come out Thursday, just an essay, but it, among other things, it talks about how protest, how exercising our First Amendment rights in public is just being increasingly criminalized at the state level. And that's kind of scary unless you have some great deal of faith that I do not have in our federal Supreme Court. So eventually it's going to get there. And I'm like, I don't like the makeup of that either. So yeah, no, but just at least we have, like you're saying, at least if we go in reading, if we go in understanding the lessons from before, at least we can try to come up with the tactics in the moment to deal with what is, you're right, a very unique situation, even though we put a nice shine on it because we have, you know, cool gadgets and you know, more whatever ethnic diversity or more distractions and stuff. It really is. It might be a little shiny or might be a little different hue, but we really do have some historical levels of oppression going on right now, and it is really really scary. I wanted to switch gears a little bit now. So I think it was last week. I mean, it's still going really, really strong out there, as if it was just dropped today. So, folks who haven't checked it out, please do. We've embedded video essay in some of our posts this week. We did a really great, what I'm calling a video essay. You can call it, I don't know what it's called. It's like, it sounds like an 80-year-old man term, but I'm calling it a video essay. You did an opinion piece for Breakthrough News, and it was, I'll let you characterize it yourself, but it was basically responding to some of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's, for a lack of a more precise, non-cliche term, gaslighting of socialists directly and others, this was, I didn't know it until I heard you say it in other interviews. I didn't know this is the first time you've done like this type of opinion piece, at least for Breakthrough News. Again, because you do some really great kind of like straight reporting and hosting and things of that nature. But you did a really really powerful essay there, and I thought, to the extent that we're going to go ahead and let's talk about the so-called identity politics, I thought it was really powerful, because one of the things that, and I'm mixing kind of several things, I'm combining like interviews she's given with like IG lives of the representative, but one of the things that she seems to be saying implicitly sometimes, explicitly, and other times is like, hey, those socialists and others who are criticizing that the Biden administration is not doing anything significant, or that there's no hope for them to do anything significant, they're basically white folk that don't really care about immigrants, who don't know what's going on, and they're just doing this in bad faith. And for what it's worth, you as a woman of color in New York, no less, came on to kind of call her out on that. What made you decide to make the video essay? What was the last straw for you, and why, considering you hadn't really done these types before, at least for your employer?
Yeah, for sure. I've had plenty of criticisms over to AOC over the years, since she won her first election. And, I never felt the need to even write a tweet about it, even really address it in any way, because I just felt like, the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, whatever you want to call it, movement, was to me a step in the right direction for really galvanizing the most oppressed people in our society, and really giving people hope, and giving people a program that they can relate to, and that they could fight for. And also, I don't know, making socialism the most like Googled word of 2016. Like, none of that, as a socialist organizer, like none of that I was going to, feel the need to really publicly crap on. It's like, of course, I know the limitations, the fallacies of quote unquote democratic socialism. I mean, it implies that socialism is not democratic, and there's so many other criticisms I could have, of folks like AOC. But I think the opportunity was just so ripe, for the fact that, yeah, the straw that broke the camel's back was really her talking about, you just can't critique Biden at all. And I'm like, she's sounding like Nancy Pelosi a couple months ago, having that like weird like open Biden like moment. Like, I was just like, you sound like, yeah, that sound a little cultish. Like, we're talking about politics and you're saying you cannot critique, and like these weird bug-eyed, like just eyes darting like Instagram lives. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, I would have so much more respect for you if you tone that defensiveness down, and like actually like put your actions where your words are at, in terms of all of the, holding Biden's feet to the fire and all of that you promise on the campaign trail, right? Or on the campaign trail during the campaign, right? So I think that was just the moment where I was like, this is just too much. And I think our instinct on the Breakthrough team was really more on point than we realized, because it seems like ever since my video dropped, she has just been on a horrible like media just blitz, like has just dug herself into such a deeper hole. And really just, and then these things coming out about her donations going to the same, corporate backed Democrats that, she made a career, made a following off of critiquing and saying she was going to hold accountable. It's just like, girl, like that fall from progressive grace, whatever, that was rapid and dramatic. But I thought it was just really a perfect time because the fact that we are now, oh, yeah, 3 months into the Biden administration, we're seeing this kind of slow, of course, inherently anti-poor, anti-worker, racist vaccine rollout. We are seeing still like the weight of the economic crisis that has yet to fully hit. It's still hitting every single day, you know. There's still more and more unemployed people every single month. Okay, we just got our $1,400 checks after what, being promised $2,000 checks for months now. Like, they really play us for a bunch of idiots. Like, and I think I I chose to spoke up in that moment because I was seeing a lot of righteous anger already in the organizing work and in the reportive work that I do. But just to hear this kind of message from someone who a lot of those same people, you know, look up to, and you know, it felt like AOC was like a breath of fresh air for progressive minded people. And you know, for her to just backtrack on so much of what she literally has fundraised off of, has made a career off of, to me was just so outrageous. And I think, you know, the fact that the video went viral, I was not expecting, I was kind of nervous putting that out there. Like you said, it was my first time doing this kind of video. So I was really not sure what the reaction would be. But the fact that, you know, so many people were just like, you really put into words like what I've been feeling and what I've been struggling to articulate. And I think it was, you know, really important. And I'm really glad that I spoke up on this. And then, yeah, it's just like every so now today, all over Twitter, there's a lot of people talking about like these ridiculous BS comments that she made in a conversation of like some CEO of like some like Israel solidarity group. I don't even know, don't quote me on this, but talking about, you know, like the goals and the what and the how and the who and like the dignity and humanity of Israelis. I'm like, what? Like, you are just like word vomiting right now. It's such a joke. So I think, yeah, I just continue to feel like I was right to put out that video, and I'm glad that I did, because that needed to be said. Because I felt all up until this point, you know, like what do we have to gain from, you know, crapping on someone like AOC? Like what do we have to gain from it? But at this point, I think it's just become clear and clearer. I think it just, what kind of poetic justice for like this article to come out exposing her finances, you know, and donating campaign donations. It's just kind of like, that's it. Like, use a dub, mama. Like, we need to be pushing forward people who are actually going to stick to their guns. I personally don't believe that, you know, any kind of revolution, I don't care if it's a democratic socialist revolution, is going to come out of Congress. But you know, I think our people are dying every single day, and I feel like I'm not going to get mad at concessions. That's just my understanding of reforms under the system. You know, they're a band-aid over the gaping wound, but at the end of the day, these things save lives. Like, I'm very happy to see, you know, people receive $1,400 stimulus checks. Like, of course, I'm kind of like, hello, like that's the least we can get. But at the end of the day, you know, $1,400 is like another month's rent, is some money for bills, is some money towards savings, you know, for millions of working class people. So I'm not gonna get mad at that. But I think we just have to we can't sit back and stay quiet as politicians like AOC are trying to do. And that rhetoric is so dangerous. And I feel like we need to just constantly also in the progressive movement on the left, like be constantly exposing who our enemies are. And when you've gone that far, like AOC, like you're a straight up enemy to the people at this point. So when you've already crossed that line or drawn that line yourself, it's just like we need to be better at speaking up generally, and calling that shit out, and then focusing, you know, within our own organizations, within our unions, within everywhere that we're working and organizing for justice. Like, we got to be focusing on leadership development and on pushing forward folks who are really going to stand up for our people. And you know, people can have their things about reformism and electoral politics. Like, I have no problem with people who are really socialists running for public office, you know, regardless if they, you know, have the ability, you know, to win or not. It's like, to put out a socialist program for your city, for your state, for your country, I think is so critically needed. Because anyone could look at this. You blank out the socialist, and anyone will agree with these things. Like, it is universally popular to stand for Medicare for all. It is universally popular to stand for canceling student loan debt. It is universally popular to have a $15 at least federal minimum wage, right? So it's like, why is the political party that we're taught as Black and brown people, as working class people, is supposed to stand on our sides, because the Republicans are so far gone that it's like we're kind of also like on the same side, like, of things, like desensitized to their fuckery, which we shouldn't be, but I think it's just like, nah, we need to be calling out, both sides of the establishment, period. But I think, yeah, it is important to call out those people who masquerade as fighters for our communities. Like, nah, like, we need to be putting up and developing and fighting for people who really do represent us.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's almost like the tone that she and the vociferousness for which she was defending Biden, and then also then like specifically trying to admonish uh, us for trying to demand better was the issue. It's like, hey, yeah, it's like, okay, we'll let you be a wealthy congresswoman now. Good for you. That's cool. Like, you're enhancing, people's just general awareness of the word of socialism. No problem. We understand you're new to Congress. We're not going to say you can fix the world. It's all good. But it's just like, when you're going to, like, really, she's the one that went on the offensive, it seems like, from rhetorically speaking, just with that tone and with that, like, the eyes darting, zooming in and out type of stuff. And I guess, that affect is probably, maybe that's just her, and it's cool, and maybe it smacks of authenticity or whatever, especially when you have the right vocabulary as she does, because she's a very impressive and talented, public figure, and she knows her audience, I guess. But it's like, if it wasn't like such, if she wasn't taking that tone and like so aggressively going to bat for them, it almost like, oh, just, it's all good. And at a certain point too, it kind of fucks with your brand strength too. At first you're like, oh, cool, people are talking about socialism. But then if people start identifying socialism with defending concentration camps and meeting with, coup leaders in Bolivia, or calling for and joining hands with Donald Trump for coup attempts in Venezuela, then you're like, well, maybe I should speak up, because I don't want people to think that's socialism. We could be like, oh, that's not true socialism, whatever. But we don't do that with democracy. We don't say, well, United States government says let's kill 1 million people in Iraq for democracy, but we know that's not really democracy, so we don't need to speak up. It's like, no, let's get involved. So yeah, and it's compelling what you're saying. Where you reach a point where you're like, this is getting a little eerie from the representative. It's time to step in. I wanted to ask you too, just a little bit. We've kind of touched a little bit about your organizing. We talked about your reporting. We've mentioned a little bit about your organizing, but what came first for you? Journalism, organizing, and how do you mix them together now, Monica?
Right. Yes. So, I would say at the same time, kind of, depending on what you technicalities. I was editor in chief of Tiger Tales, my high school newspaper. No, but I've been, writing, very interested in journalism, since I was in high school, like a kid. I was always interested in politics, like always trying to watch the news, read up on CNN, or whatever. Because that's really all I knew. I didn't come from a family that was political. I didn't come from a family that even really paid attention to the news or current events, or that was something that, was talked about at the dinner table, like, not really often. Um, Even though we were very much impacted, by so many of these things, as a working class, mixed family. Like, my mom's Puerto Rican. I grew up mostly around my stepdad, who's white, working class, here in New Jersey. And, so I saw so many of these contradictions, like, living and breathing in my life and those around me. But I was really able to kind of mix more of them together when I got to college, and I was still doing student journalism, like, helping edit a student run newspaper. And I would try to talk about, at that time, it was just like really feminism and like LGBTQ rights. And, I never really made, I wasn't Marxist at all. And I would call myself socialist, like, at that point based off of my idea of socialism, which was kind of like this Nordic model, like Michael Moore type thing inspired, but it wasn't on the worst track. I was grateful for at least that little bit of like political education, imagining things outside of just like what the Democrats and Republicans, had to offer, and thinking like, oh wow, like affordable housing for everyone, like eradicating homelessness, like that's possible, like providing healthcare for all, like that's possible. And understanding the roles that corporations played in all of these things. And I think it was actually studying, like taking like my intro to communications classes, where I learned that five major conglomerates own 90% of what or control 90% of what we consume in the US. I remember just sitting in my class, like as a freshman, just being like, am I the only one hearing this? Because that shit crazy. Like, how is no one like, this should make us all very uncomfortable. I'm just like, and no, that was just how things worked. And so I remember like by the time I was like maybe a sophomore, like I just started to feel kind of like nihilistic and just like disillusioned, right? Like, like there's just so much, so many contradictions, so much violence, so much poverty, so much struggle and oppression that we're dealing with. Like understanding my history, like as a Puerto Rican, as a Black person, and delving into that. And I was just kind of like at a like at a dead end, not a crossroads, like at a dead end, just kind of like, so where do I go? Because, growing up and, even at my college campus, I went to Fordham, which was like super conservative. It's like a Jesuit school, like super right wing, like just a bunch of like, it's like the home of like future Trumps, like that, like all day, like they're just so ridiculous. Like they're just so blatantly, I could just go on. It was traumatizing. But it's like I remember, just feeling just kind of like, where is the way out? I was unexposed in any way to any like real, like I didn't know that there were actual like socialist political parties like fighting on a Marxist political line. Like I didn't know any of that. Like the most radical thing that I knew about was like maybe like just anarchism and just people just lighting shit on fire. And I was like, I guess that's where all ends up at this point, because I don't know what else to do. And I'm glad I didn't end up there. But it was really actually through my organizing, and yeah, like just like the feminist club on campus, whatever, I was introduced to a couple of people who are, now my comrades, who were doing more like radical work in terms of like getting just better sexual and reproductive health services like on campus. Because super, again, was just super draconian and right wing with so many of these things. Like you could literally get written up by your RA for having like condoms in your dorm room, like super crazy. So we were waging like a whole, just like raining condoms on like student events and stuff, and like had like a whole condom delivery thing, and we're getting like pulled into meetings with like the whatever, like whoever was like the student whatever advisor, who was the one who would deal with disciplinary issues like that. So we were always getting in trouble. And they introduced me to my organizations, the Party for Socialism and Liberation and the Answer Coalition. And I started attending like open mics that were being organized at our old office on 135th Street in Harlem. And, went to like my first like political forum meeting, where some of, now my comrades, like organizers were talking about all different hot topics in the news, campaigns and work that they were a part of. And I remember just sitting there, I was just like a bobblehead. Like I was just like, like just agreeing with everything that they were saying throughout the entire meeting. And I was just so quick to sign up, and it was just like, yes, this is where I need to be. And all of my experience since then, this was like 2014, like has just confirmed. And especially just seeing, that was, in the middle, the Obama administration, and seeing that, and then the age of Trump, like all of my experiences in this time now, as a sense of self-identified, Marxist Leninist specifically, I was just like, like this is it. Like the party formation that we have going on with the PSL is necessary. And I felt like I was just constantly, like my political orientation was just constantly being like proof correct. And I'm so proud of the party and the work that we do, and the fact that we have grown so quickly in recent years, I think is also a testament to the contradictions becoming so clear for our class. in the way that the system just exposes itself. So yeah, that's really how I got into it. It was always a mix, and I studied journalism, like I said, at Fordham, but I never really anticipated that I would actually work as a journalist. Like I knew a handful of left journalists, but like I knew they were always kind of like struggling, and I'm like, listen, I got mad student loan debt to pay back. Like I can't be struggling like this. Like I can't move back home. Like I want to be able to live on my own in expensive ass New York. Like I'm gonna do what I have to do. So I remember, my first two jobs outside of after graduation, I mean, were just basic like HR admin assistant type things. Like first at like, the small like staffing agency, and then another at a small nonprofit. But it was just kind of like 9 to 5 stuff. Like I was just like doing my political organizing in my free time. But lucky enough, thanks to a lot of work that was put in, for years, to launch the start of an independent media outlet with folks that I've known in the movement for years. That came to be. We launched actually like Breakthrough News, like literally at the start of New York City being shut down last March. And we've just been going up from here. It's definitely not an easy thing, because like I said, it's in part a media project, but also a political project in a lot of ways. And we are all inspired to do this work because of our experiences as working class people, but also of our experiences as organizers in the movement, knowing that it's so necessary for us to have a media arm of the mass movement for workers' rights and for the liberation of all people. So yeah, that's kind of how it came to be. I never again thought that I would be the kind of person who would end up working in the field that I literally studied. Like I was like a double major in communications and in political science. I feel really just blessed and honored to be doing this work. But I see it as so intrinsically tied in a lot of ways. And another quick thing, a concept that really dope Brazilian comrade of mine, decades in the movement, amazing person came up with, that the party utilizes, is called militant journalism. And it's basically the idea that it's just like it's such a lie that there's anything that we could call objective journalism. There is no objective journalism. There is always an agenda, whether you're conscious of it or not. There is always a viewpoint. You as a person, as a working class person, our lives are material. Our struggles, experiences are material. There is no way to separate that from what we're writing and thinking or creating, right? Or arguing. So it's just like, to me, that was a very important part of understanding what it means to work in media, what it means to be a journalist in a world that tries to depoliticize everything that we do in the media industry, right? But I think pushing back against that and being like, nah, there is something political and personal and all of it in the work that we do. And yeah, we need to stop acting like objective journalism is even a thing, right? When we're talking about like the Washington Post getting like daily briefings and shit from like the Pentagon, like what are we talking about here? So yeah, that was definitely a really amazing fundamental thing that the party taught me, and that organizing taught me, and the way that I've been able to really see the connections between my work as a journalist and an organizer.
I love it. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I think, I like that phrase, militant journalism. I teach a class, a university class called critical journalism, where we read critical theory and some case studies. And then I kind of try to indoctrinate students into my type of journalism, which rejects the notion, the possibility of objectivity, right? And it actually reveals like the political economy in news media in America of this value of objectivity, and we think of it as though it was like written, inscribed by the hand of God on stone tablets, but in reality, the archive shows us that the Hearst Publications, a big conglomerate, newspaper and radio conglomerate of its day, where that was, that's what they Orson Welles based the character in Citizen Kane on, right? Like that got us into the Spanish American War. When they wanted to syndicate and they wanted to go national outside of specific regions in order to save on labor costs, they wanted to have columnists and reporters that were in one location have that work in multiple markets. So to blend it up, to make it work, they said you have to have this subjective stance, just so they could save money and use it in multiple locations. Yet we've come to worship this as though it's like a matter of ethics and morality, when I agree, it sounds like with what you and your comrades are saying, which is, the best we can do is be transparent and honest about what we're saying, what we're doing. We can have evidence, if we're making an argument, But this notion that pretending that we can be angelic or we can be objective is, I mean, philosophically, there's people, of course, that say objectivity is not possible, period, right? But within this world of journalism, I think it's particularly important, especially because such evil is done in the name of objectivity, right? Such horrible things are covered by the media, or covered over by the media, because they shouldn't take a side. They shouldn't take a side on this genocide or this apartheid. We need to have two sides of the story and things of that nature. So all that is to say is I agree with that, and I'm going to be bugging you this summer. I got to see if you'll talk to my class over video. I'd love to have journalists speak to the students. I think that's really, really important, and they don't get that perspective from working journalists enough just out there. Last question for you, Monica, although I could talk with you for a long, long time. I know you've been super generous with your time. We didn't even have a source to get back to from Alabama, so we want you to get to that. But speaking of your reporting, can you give us a sense of maybe what you have in the works in terms of coverage? Are we going to see more opinion pieces from you? Are we going to see you? I know we're in a pandemic, so it's kind of weird and tricky. Are you going to be out in the field more as well? And where can we find your stuff and your takes?
Yeah, thank you for that. I would definitely love to join a class. I have some very, very incredibly experienced and honestly probably more well spoken and more knowledgeable than I am. My amazing coworkers at Breakthrough, Eugene Perrier, a new addition to our team, Rania Kalik. I mean, just a powerhouse in the left media world. So definitely, I can definitely bring that back to our team. I'm sure folks would be down if we could work it out schedule wise in the summer, but for sure. And yeah, so a lot of things that I'm trying to do in terms of our reporting is really, yeah, be actually on the field more often. Even with the pandemic, I wear my mask. It is what it is. We are technically essential workers as journalists, right? So we were back in the office working like in July, while most of the city was still really shut down. So I will definitely be there, doing a lot more live content actually. So look out for that. Up until this point on the picket line has been a very highly produced segment. I'm in the studio reporting, sometimes, throwing it back to field reports that I do, to interviews and all of that. But I really want to be doing more live content at the picket line, at these different actions, doing more traveling. I've been, all the content that I've really gotten, at actions has really just been in New York, or, I took a trip to DC with New York's, yellow cab drivers, with the New York Taxi Workers Alliance back in December, actually. So that's really been like the only like out of state work that I've done. So trust me, I'm making it happen. Trying to make some moves for sure. So yeah, definitely more live content for sure. And trying to move myself out the studio, which I think, has its benefits in some ways, but I feel can be a little static and feel removed from the struggle. And again, just grabbing on that history of labor, of reporting being something that's like really intense, like in the middle of, literally in the middle of the class struggle, in the middle class war. We want to put that out there because obviously people love exciting shit, let's just be real, but also because those stories need to be told. And as I talked about in the beginning of the interview, I feel like there isn't very much room for those stories to be told well in this current media landscape. But I really give it up to some of the labor reporters that I follow, who I feel like are doing great work, like Kim Kelly. We're doing amazing work reporting in Bessemer. Shout out Kim. I'm like one of her million, like, wow, everybody's Twitter followers. I'm like, amazing. Like, I'm like a amateur labor reporter, like trying to learn. But no, but definitely that in terms of, yeah, those opinion pieces. I was obviously a video essay. Listen, I like that video op-ed, call it what you want. I've literally just been calling it rants. There's definitely a way more like maybe more fancy or whatever way of saying that. But yeah, definitely more of that content to come for sure, live from here. my studio apartment. So definitely look out for that. And you can follow Breakthrough News at BT Newsroom on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us at just Breakthrough News, spelled regularly, on YouTube and Facebook. And you can follow my personal account on Twitter at Palante Mami. That's PALANTEMAMI, on Twitter, for all of my work. I keep it consistent with posting my work as best as I can. So yeah.
Monica, thanks again so much for your time. It was a blast getting to chat with you. And yeah, everyone, make sure you follow them if you're not already. You will not regret it. So thanks again, Monica.
No problem.